All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. We have a couple more people who will probably be joining us as the program gets underway, but we'll go ahead and get the show on the road here. So I want to say welcome to everybody here on this evening. We have a very exciting program in store for all of you tonight. For those of you who are not familiar with myself, my name is George Segayev. I'm the programs manager here at the History Center of Lake Forest Lake Bluff, and we're very excited to be hosting a program with Dino Robinson tonight entitled Evanston's Shorefront Legacy Center. So this program is pretty exciting in a number of ways. First of which, it's being a culmination of our 2022 programming series, Deeply Rooted and Rising High, which was a series of programs that we were able to curate and put together through a grant awarded to the History Center back in March of this year from the National Endowment for the Humanities and American Historical Association. So we had the opportunity to do a lot of local history research and put together a number of different programs, and most of those have been recorded and are available on the History Center YouTube channel to go back and view. But tonight is very, very special. We have Dino Robinson with us, former acting director of Shorefront and founder of the organization, and he's going to be discussing kind of the early history of Shorefront, current projects, and then maybe a little bit about the future of the organization moving forward. So we're very happy to have him. Dino, thank you so much for being here. I've got a couple introductory messages just to kind of iron out before we get started here. For anyone viewing on Zoom, if you go to the top right corner of your screen, there's a view button. You can click on that and select speaker view. That'll make the program just a little bit easier to watch. And then additionally, you can click on full screen to just make it a little bit easier to view who's talking. We do ask that all questions are kept until the end of the presentation. At that time, we'll be devoting about 15 minutes to a questions and answers segment with Dino. So at that point, you can unmute your microphone or type something in the chat function down at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be reading out those questions for Dino, and that'll be about 15 to 20 minutes. This program is also being recorded and will be made available on the History Center's YouTube channel following the end of the program. If you registered for this program, you will get an automatic email with the link to that YouTube recording. And so you can view that for free, like I said, on the History Center YouTube channel. So with that, it is my pleasure to announce tonight's guest speaker. Dino Robinson is the production manager at Northwestern University Press. Throughout his career, he operated Robinson Design, was an instructor at Appl, and was an art director within various advertising firms in Chicago. Dino was the former acting director of Shorefront, an organization he pioneered in 1995. Within Shorefront, he has written 3 books, produces a quarterly journal that has been running since 1999, hosted dozens of lectures, and has assembled several subject-specific traveling exhibits. He is past board president of the Evanston History Center, Evanston Neighborhood Conference, and co-founder of the Organization of Black Designers, the Chicago chapter now known as Osmosis. So with that, Dino Robinson, we're very happy to have you, and please take the stage.
Well, thank you for having me tonight, and thank you for that introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to get things started. I anticipate this presentation taking about 30 minutes. And then, as said, we will share Q&A afterwards. We'll be more than happy to share whatever is needed. And as stated, it's recorded. I'm going to start with just actually, let me stop share for a second. I have to make sure I check something before when I shared it. I did do that. Okay, good. I'm going to start with a video, and hope you enjoy. It's about 60 seconds long, and then I'll go from there. Shorefront is an organization that documents the African-American experience on Chicago's suburban North Shore. Our archives date back over 100 years, and it consists of photographs and personal files from families that grew up here for multiple generations.
When we can pull from these sources, pull from this material, then we can better understand who we are as a people.
Shorefront Legacy Center is extremely valuable because it is documenting the lives of Black people in a space outside of this large urban area.
This belongs to the community. This is a home away from home. So our immediate interest, our area of interest covers the suburban North Shore of Evanston, of the suburbs of Chicago. And we kind of targeted this section, one, for proximity of space, distance, and just his historic significance that hasn't been well documented, or at least well publicized in his documentation over the last 150 plus years. And we specifically focus on Evanston, Glencoe, and Lake Forest. But our territory does actually expand a little bit further than that, a little bit north and a little further west as opportunities arise. But we're hopeful and helpful with organizations that dive into their local Black history and help provide some pointers and guidance in doing so. And we've assisted multiple organizations throughout the North Shore and the Chicago metropolitan area, and in some cases in other states in this country, with how to engage community members. Again, I started this about 25 years ago, literally on my dining room table. This is the dining room table I started at, and that's my workstation, and that's the archive when I first started this back in 1995. And much to my wife's patience, she allowed me to start collecting artifacts on that dining room table and store it underneath the dining room table until she said it's time to relocate to another location. We ended up moving from this apartment, and we moved to another apartment where we purchased the entire building, and I was able to utilize this garden apartment as Shorefront's first office. So this was the second iteration of Shorefront as we were beginning our hard work and trying to identify the stories that were in the North Shore area. And one of the things we did early on to help engage partnerships and activity was working with existing historical organizations and interest groups. There were 5 that we identified in Evanston, 2 that we identified in Glencoe, and then as far as institutions like the History Center of Lake Forest, that institution, your institution, actually became one of our first collaborations. And we developed a series of panels that resulted in a series called North of Chicago. And they consisted of multiple panels that gave a brief history of the communities that we were engaged in: Lake Forest, Glencoe, Wilmette, and Evanston, or the first ones that we have done. Since then, the program had expanded to encompass a series called Legacies, which now numbers over 20 panels that tour around the North Shore area. Even at this location, though, we were growing too fast. At the time, I was had my own business as a designer, and I was working out of the same office, but Shorefront took over the entire office. You can't see it as kind of off this image, but off to the left was another room that had about 5 bookshelves full of archives there. And I would have visitors who come and do research in this garden unit apartment, and we would have our board meetings around that small table there. And our board at the time consisted of 15 members. So chairs circling around the small table, crammed in there for our monthly meetings of how to grow the organization. And we did. In 2008, we grew into a space in a former community school known as Foster School. Now it's the Family Focus Community Center based in Evanston, Illinois. We took occupancy on the second floor in a double classroom, and we renovated the space to have a library and research room and a gallery space. And from there, we grew in that capacity, where we kind of outgrew that space, and we moved into our current location in the lower level of Sherman United Methodist Church. We've been there since 2013. And since our move there, our archives had doubled. So that kind of shows like the engagement that we have done with the community and the trust we built over time to build this. This particular photograph here, and I'll address this a little bit later in the presentation, are community members having a discussion about our local churches in Evanston with representatives from the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. They made 3 separate trips out to Evanston and specifically to Shorefront to learn more about what we were doing with community archiving. And that's what we kind of specialize in, is engagement. We see what's going on contemporary activities, and we also look at the past. And we try and bring everything back into this one comprehensive timeline. When I first started doing research, what I often found were families that have a wonderful sense of their own history, but it was within their own timeline. So the first always start with what their first memory was, and not realizing that there was a history before that. And what Shorefront started doing is constructing a grander timeline from the beginning to present day, and then planning for future. And we do this with a lot of our activities. We don't necessarily want to be the leader in any type of activity, but we are quite content to be the observer in such activities. Let the community do their things and just be kind of like the fly on the wall, recording everything, documenting everything, and making sure there is an archive that presents itself for future use. And some of these instances, like for example, artist Ben Blount, who when he moved to from Detroit to Evanston about 10, 15 years ago, he started a letterpress business here in Evanston. What we learned as we were engaging, get to know each other, is that his grandmother was born and raised in Evanston. So for him, it was like coming home, and he was able to share his family legacies here, and he shares with the community. Currently, we're both partnering together in a program with an organization in Chicago, 60 Inches from Center, and producing a curated archival art interpretation of a sample of our archives. He viewed an archive on social clubs, and he created a series of posters indicative of that time period with his letterpress art. And this will later go into a publication with other organizations that are doing similar collaborations between archives and artists. I think there's a total of 6 artists and archive groups that are working on this publication that's due out in March. Another thing we do is engage in public oral histories. And we call it, there's several names that we use it for, but one of the ones that we like using the most is when we do at City Hall, where we kind of pair a senior and a youth together, and we do an live oral history interview process with both participants, followed by Q&A with audience that attend. We also do recognition. And many people don't know the ties that we have, the African American community has, not with just the local general area of Chicago metropolitan area, but on a national platform. And for those who may have watched the TV series Queen Sugar, which is in this last season this year, there is a character on the program that goes by Aunt Vi, that is portrayed by Tina Lifford, who grew up in Evanston, Illinois. And in this scene here, we captured a street naming honoring, recognizing her experience, her talent in acting, but also she's standing on the front porch where she grew up. And which is more special for me is that it's 2 doors away from where I live. So it was just a great community activity. There were probably about 50 people out there, and she was reunited with friends that she grew up with during her childhood. And another thing that really excites us when people come and visit Shorefront. And this picture right here just kind of represents 3 generations, where this young man here, well, my contemporary, donated a lot of family archives. And when he came back, he brought his father, and he brought his kids to see the family history together. And when they came on the visit, they brought in additional materials to add to the collection, so that future generations of their family and descendants of their family can always visit and find a place where their archives are being stored. And we're really keen about building these relationships. And in doing that, we really look into the community to help guide us and inform us and make sure we're on the right path in what we do. But what we find in the end, when we build these relationships, it builds that trust that's needed. And we become like this extended family. So it's not unusual that throughout our time that we've been doing Shorefront, we're constantly engaging in the same families over and over again. So it's not like we identified a target of family, they had some interesting items, we meet with them, we acquire, put in our archives, and then that's it. No, we're still engaged with these same families. Sometimes when we do programming or put up an exhibit, we call them up and say, hey, we just put up an exhibit and we have some items of that represent your family in this exhibit. I want to make sure you know about that. And they come out and sometimes they get excited and they say, hey, look, we have more things to add to the collection. So we find this really good symbiotic relationship with the community where we are engaging them. They have the sense of ownership and they keep adding to the collection. This photograph you see here is kind of one of my favorite photographs. When I was just on an impromptu visit, I came by with a scrapbook from another community member. And that scrapbook contained articles that she wrote in the Chicago Defender when she was a teenager. And I was showing this woman here these pictures in there because I remember her, when I interviewed her, talking about a singing group that she used to be involved in. And it just so happened that that bottom image here is the singing group that she was in that was recorded in the Chicago Defender in the 1960s. And they were called the Darnells. And so when she saw that picture, and this is her right here as a young girl, she was telling me a more comprehensive story behind that picture and what was happening at that time, including almost being signed to a record label, Chess Records in Chicago. But they never signed the paperwork because after high school, they graduated, 3 got married, 1 moved, and 1 started a full-time job. So that was the end of the group. Still an interesting story though, and it was just really great to capture that moment when she's doing this fond memory. So with Shorefront, we're utilized in multiple ways, through school projects, tours, research, genealogy. We have PhD candidates doing their practicums at Shorefront, sometimes even utilizing our offices for an extended period of time as their base station for research to finish out their books or their dissertations or whatever projects they're working on. And sometimes in our exchange of payment is researchers sometimes deposit their research materials in producing their final works at Shorefront. So we have that record, it's that participatory research and adding to the collection, thus continuing that engagement. And some of these people now I see on TV. If you're watching like this on the History Channel, The Foods That Made America, when they started talking about franchising, there was a scene about like McDonald's, and one of the commentators on there was Marcia Chaitlin, who was a professor at I think Washington University. But when she was working on a PhD, she was working out of Shorefront, working on her books related to that subject matter. Our resources, we have a website with multiple resources on there that include finding aids, downloadable finding aids. We have access to our Shorefront journal that's online, social connections to our social media, and our oral history collection that includes transcripts and the actual audio, so you can listen in and read at the same time. And this is the website, what the website looks like for our oral history collection. This project actually was an interesting partnership that kind of grew over a course of time with local community members, the Smithsonian, and the Illinois State Historical Records Advisory Board to help assemble our outmoded data. There were cassette tapes and DAT tapes, digitizing them, transcriptions, creating metadata, designing a website, and employing and putting 37 audio oral histories on its websites for people to utilize. And they have been used. I wish I had a tracking number on there now, but we get a lot of visits to that site now. In addition, we do a journal that was mentioned earlier, a quarterly journal that started out with in 1999. And it went through different design iterations. and grew from a simple 4-pager newsletter to a 24-page magazine. And then in 2012, we transformed it, moved it over to an online platform with entries there with an annual publication of the collections of the previous year. And again, this is a contributed volume where anybody can submit an article for publication. We always have our interns, when they intern with us, they're required to write an article about their experience or what they researched, thus adding to the archives. We also launched a publication arm called Shorefront Press, and we have about 15 publications now, and we publish through lulu.com. With access to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other places. But we kind of like to have the control of our publications. So we really like the relationship we have with Lulu, with the control that we have in our releases and our distribution. And we're working on 3 new books right now, dealing with very subject-specific items that we found in our collection. We also employ interns, whether they're filling college credit or doing some practicums or placement for their class assignments. We generally work through the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, which is an organization in Chicago, of a consortium of museums that have Black collections. Shorefront's been involved with the BMRC since 2010 and now serve on its board of directors. But through that program, we had assistance with processing our collections, training, resource development, and engagement with the community, not just in the Chicago metropolitan area, but on a national platform as well. The students that we have come from interning generally come from Loyola University, Dominican University, and Northwestern University. And Northwestern University has been really stepping up as of late. We've been getting graduate studies students to actually work for consecutive months inside Shorefront, managing the collections, adding to it, and sometimes reboxing and refolding our collections. An exciting part of our work is what I mentioned before, was the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We first got engaged with them in 2019 with their community curation program. This was a partnership with the BMRC in Chicago, and I had to do a little bit of pushing with this group because their main focus was the South Side of Chicago. And I kept on mentioning to them that you cannot get a complete story by defaulting to the general story of Blacks on the South Side of Chicago. There is a greater, more complex history in the Chicago metropolitan area. You cannot ignore it. And I implore you to come up to Evanston at least and set up shop there. So they did do so. They spent 3 weeks at the DuSable Museum and 1 week in Evanston. They later shared that their largest attendance was that 1 week in Evanston. We processed over 2,000 images and over 200 hours of audio and video and moving images just in that 1 week time. They also had symposiums and classes inside the high school that they were stationed in front of. And then we staged an area where we're doing some additional scanning and digitizing within the school. What's beautiful about this project, though, is that this led to a closer partnership today. So between 2022 and 2023, we're involved with them again as we are a recipient of a gift of equipment so we can continue our digitization process. So they'll donate the equipment for our VHS, audio tapes, other moving image mediums, scanner, and a copy stand to work with for at least 1 year in our center to help digitize the remaining collections that we have slated for digitization, so we can make it more discoverable and more accessible to researchers for their programs and projects. One favorite program we worked on was a documentary on Evanston's first African-American mayor and longest serving mayor in Evanston, Lorraine H. Morton. This was a work that project we worked on for about 8 years in total. First, it was just negotiating with Mrs. Morton about we need to document her, and she was kind of resistant to it because she just felt she was a public servant and she's doing what she's supposed to do and no need to record it. But we finally convinced her to at least capture her life story with a series of 4 interviews. And we did so over 4 consecutive Fridays. And for those who may not know Lorraine Morton, she's a talker. We promised that we would not take up any more than 1 hour of her time with very succinct questions and divide up into 4 parts: her early childhood, her early work and schooling and work career, then as alderwoman and then running for mayor, and then her retirement. But we ended up recording over 16 hours of video. And we were able to turn that video into a 45-minute documentary discussing her life. In this audience here, this was the first screening, the initial screening held on Northwestern University's campus. And the first 2 rows, the first 2 rows behind her are all family members from all over the country. They came to celebrate her life. We had about 100 people in the audience. And she still held court. She was 99 years old in this picture. Full capacities. The sad story is that 3 months after the screening of this, she did pass on. But we were fortunate to get this film done in time before her passing. And I think it was the proudest moment of her life. And the comment that kind of sticks with me is when she said, "This film is beautiful. My work is done. I can rest now." That still resonates with me to this day, knowing that she had passed 3 months later. This is this trailer to the movie.
Did some people come to you and say, "We want you to run for mayor"?
I'm here at home, and in comes a group of people. Asked me to run for mayor. I said, "Oh no, I can't do that." Look in the dictionary for the definition of a politician, and I guarantee you won't want to be called a politician either.
And for a black person to be mayor of Evanston and live in the 5th Ward, I didn't think would ever happen.
She has the courage of her convictions.
Let's see how many of those things are important to the citizens of Evanston.
I didn't allow anybody to call me a politician. I call myself, and I still call myself, a public servant. Only a life of service is a life worthwhile.
So that movie was screened about a dozen times throughout the Chicago metropolitan area, and well received. We actually had one screening at the local movie theater here in Evanston as well as a fundraising activity. Another way our archives are utilized is with social justice. And if those of you who have been following the news media in Evanston in regards to reparations, one of the main reasons why I was able to launch is because of the use of our archives at Shorefront and the report that we generated through the archives at Shorefront for the city of Evanston to utilize in justification of a restorative work. And I was able to educate the city with, a little bit of history with that and really kind of illustrating who kind of started this whole process. And that was Evanston's first African-American alderman, Edwin B. Jourdain Jr., who was a graduate of Harvard University, came to Evanston to attend Northwestern journalism, but ended up only taking about 3 months of classes before he left and was hired at the Chicago Defender, in Chicago Bee and the Chicago Whip newspapers to sometimes as managing editor or sports editor, but he really wanted to get into a lot of issues with social justice. Because of his activity and his advocacy, he was asked to run for alderman, and he ran and won in 1931 and served for 16 years, servicing the 5th Ward in Evanston, where he fought against Jim Crow policies and laid a major foundation to the fight or the work that we're doing now in regards of reparations, equity, and social justice. We leaned heavily on his early work to help justify the report. We have and hold his archives at Shorefront that was donated by his children to make sure that his legacy lived on. And in that collection, it spans over 100 years. It includes his father, Edwin Jourdain Sr., who was an attorney in Boston and was instrumental in the establishment of the NAACP, when it was known then as the Niagara Movement. He was the first host of the Niagara Movement. He led with W.B. Du Bois, led the activities in envisioning an organization that would fight injustices. So Edwin Jourdain Jr. learned from that. He took that fight at Harvard and desegregated the dormitories at Harvard University. He came to Evanston and kept doing that same fight. And at one time in his career, he was the assistant superintendent of schools in the state of Illinois. He held that position for 2 years before he was put off because he was trying to desegregate all the schools in Illinois. And that just was not going to happen in that time period. But in order to do, and in doing so, we were able to create this report. It's about 80 pages now, and it's freely downloadable out on the City of Evanston's website. And now over 100 municipalities across the United States have downloaded the same report to help them structure their work toward restorative justice in their communities. How did we do that? How did you use the local archives to do so? And how did we, peel back the bandages that caused the harm in recognizing the harm done to a community? But it shows the strength of what an archive can do in a community, how informative it can be, and how best to utilize that. In addition, we kind of use our archives to start, recognizing things that are happening in the community. And one of the new programs that we're doing now is the Evanston African American Heritage Initiative, where we thought about and brainstormed how can we recognize sites in Evanston and maybe even throughout the North Shore eventually that maybe still be there or no longer there, that honors the African American community, that doesn't necessarily fit within the already established criteria for preservation districts or historic districts that deal with housing or architecture. So we focus more on the historical narrative behind the structures that families or organizations resided in. So we crafted bronze placards that are embedded in the sidewalks in front of sites. And we engaged the community in selections of new sites on an annual basis. This was a partnership with the City of Evanston. They loved the idea because this was like an idea that was kind of marinating for about 20 years in Evanston, first as a conservation district, but that proved to be complicated. The installation of major kiosks, but that was deemed as an eyesore. So when I came up with this process of using and getting inspired by the historic markers in sidewalks of the manufacturer who laid the sidewalks, I said, well, why don't we do this with bronze plaques and just embed them in the sidewalk and do the same thing? And this was unveiling of one marker, site number 1, for the home of Edwin B. Jourdain Jr. And the current resident lifted a sign with me to establish that program. And engaged, and what's great about this is that she knew a bit about the history, so she had that opportunity to share what she knew about it. She shared with community members that knew and grew up with the family, and it became this like community engagement, participatory unveiling. Co-led is managed by Shorefront, but co-led by the community. And we're really excited about this program. The website is there. You're welcome to go to it. You'll find on there an interactive maps of the sites that we have laid so far, and they will continue to grow as the years go on. Lastly, I'd like to really talk about, like our collaborators, and just to iterate how important it is to maintain these and engage with them for bigger and better programs that can happen across, our work and their work in an equitable fashion. So we're really big on how equitable partnerships can happen, how that works. We kind of big institutions that kind of come in Columbus into a community. We really kind of like structure that and show how a better engagement is to make sure that the community that you're engaged in maintains their control of their narrative. And it's proven to be successful, and more models are being picked up across the nation, utilizing our concept of how to do community engagement. In fact, I'm doing another discussion about community engagement and equitable practices, and doing that at Northwestern University in the coming weeks. And finally, with Shorefront, I'm just really proud of how we've grown over the years. We see ourselves as one of the first publicly accessible archives on a subject-specific topic on the African-American community, all in one place. Right now, we have over 500 linear feet of archival materials covering over 150 years of local history. We have been recognized as a model independent community-based archive within the industry. On a national platform, we served as as an idea organization and how other organizations can do similar things. And we provide a lot of work with local municipalities about how to utilize their archives, local archives, into making transformative movements within their communities. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your time. We're on the web, shorefrontlegacy.org. We have online presence with our Facebook, Twitter, which I honestly have to say we don't use as much as we probably should. It's hard to keep up with all these things. Instagram, we love putting up a lot of photographs that we get, like snapshots around the community. We have some of our journals online, as well as at issue.com. We have a few of our early publications of Shorefront Journal for perusal as well. And with that, thank you so much. I'm willing to entertain any questions.
Thank you so much, Dino, for that incredible presentation, introduction to Shorefront's legacy and steps moving forward. Just an absolutely incredible story. So at this point, as Dino mentioned, we have maybe 15-20 minutes for some questions. So feel free to type anything into the chat function or unmute your microphone, and you can ask the question verbally too.
Hey, Dino, thanks so much for a great presentation. Really well done, very interesting. So if you were granted an unlimited budget, what would you do next?
Two things. Have a street level facility where people can come and engage in a highly trafficked area. We've identified that we would love to be near our high school here. We've got a lot of students that like to utilize our work. And secondly, build an endowment that will fund Shorefront in perpetuity. I think that's very important with organizations like yourselves too. Like, how do you fund your staff every year? Care of collections, digitization, preservation of the work that you do. I think a lot of people still don't really understand what goes into doing that, how the finances behind that. I mean, archival boxes are not cheap. You know, processors are not cheap. And the space that's needed to store items is not cheap. It's like space that's needed, but it's not utilized in a public venue in a way that, say, a theater would be or a library would be. So that is that's our dream. We did establish an endowment, and we're growing that. We are working with the city of Evanston to get street level space and other ways of partnering, especially now when there's a lot of things that are happening in the North Shore area with development and interest. We're finding municipalities are like working on development and rebuilding their libraries or community centers and pouring millions of dollars in. And I'm finding that a lot of these organizations that are upstarting and are utilizing Shorefront archives to further their cause, and then they're awarded like millions of dollars, especially recently in ARPA funds. And I'm sitting here going like, hello.
What about me?
Hello. Where do you think they got it
I'm not
from?
opposed to kickbacks.
Bring it over here. So I'm really learning how to, like, I'm kind of like in that frame of mind now of I'm calling in all the favors now. Doing all this work all this time, it's time to kind of like pay the bills now.
Yeah.
And I think organizations are beginning to understand how, organizations like ours, humanity, we're in humanities. And we fall in between like arts and social services. Both those subject matters utilize humanities to further their cause. But it's so hard for people to envision what humanities do. What is the tangible visual thing that they see that is exciting? In the arts, you see an installation, you can see a performance, you can see public, video or documentaries. In social services, you see stats, youth being served or seniors being helped. But humanity is like this quiet resource that stays in the background of everybody's mind, but only comes to mind when it's time for them to find money. So I'm trying to put us out more in the forefront. I engage with foundations to say you need to refigure how you do funding. You're so focused on, let's say, large institutions like universities, when you need to focus on small organizations that are really doing all the hard work. And universities are actually coming in and saying, look what we discovered. We're going to take all this stuff, put it up behind our walls. Now you have to ask permission to see the stuff that we took from you. So I'm trying to reverse that conversation and saying it's the community members that need those resources. And we are skilled because, after all, we have a board and staff that are made up of people that came from institutions, have graduated from institutions. So we do know what we're doing. I myself, I'm a graphic designer, so I could put a lot of my skills into Shorefront. My minor was in African American Studies. Our board is made up of attorneys, teachers, government officials, realtors, PhD candidates, professors, and seniors that have lived here or have family legacies that span multiple generations. So I think we're well informed, but not well resourced like universities may be.
Right.
So I remember having one discussion with one university who said, well, we have all this state-of-the-art stuff, blah, blah, blah. You should bring all your stuff over to us. And I basically said, well, you have a great playground, but nobody wants to play in it because you won't allow us to play in it.
Right.
So bring those resources. If you really want to be helpful, bring those resources for the community to use, and we can build collectively, collaboratively on a bigger thing. So sorry to be long-winded in that. I talk about this a lot with community members across the nation, and it's just a really engagement type thing that help people think differently.
Thank you for sharing that, though. It's good to know sort of what the vision is.
All right, wonderful. So we've got some questions typed in over here. Aaron asks, do you collect archival materials or stories from younger generations in Evanston as well?
Yes, we do. And I've always talked to, especially when we have engaged with high school students, I always say to them that, what's missing in our archives? The voice of the young. Because remember, these famous people that we're looking up now were once young too, but we have no record of their youth. So imagine we had the records of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a high school student. What did he do? What kind of trouble did he get into? What was his hobbies? Or, any public figure that we revere now or study now. What was their childhood like? Why isn't that captured? So we do engage youth in many aspects. There are times that we actually had one instance where we had a high school student that just won state top first place in state track meet. She came to Shorefront and we recorded her experience with that, and she donated her running shoes, her bib, and her medal to the collection. And she's like, I don't know how this is interesting. Oh, let me untie the laces. I said, no, leave the laces tied how they are, because she tied it in a very specific way and she had twists to them. That was her signature. So just leave it like it is. This is your story. Another thing we did for a long time, we had something called the Legacy Keepers Project. And this engaged middle school students in capturing history from their point of view. So at the time when we did this early in 2000, we were using disposable cameras, and we armed them with disposable cameras. They went around and photographed the community. And then they self-curated their imagery. We blew them up and mounted them on the wall, and they did a formal presentation within the community of why they chose their images, and they wrote about it. Some of those images are still hanging up in one of the community centers, and now their siblings and actually, other family members are now seeing these images that are still up. So they got engaged. Another project they worked on was early blogging. There was a blog platform called Posterous that we loved using because you could use smartphones to do that. And a lot of these kids already had smartphones. So we'd have these like hour-long sessions once a week, and we would just talk about how was your week? What did you do in school? What were your fun activities that you did? And so I kind of got their minds thinking about what they did. And in the last 15 minutes, they go on a blog site and blog their experience. And that became a growing website, and we call it Day in the Life of a Teen. So that was one other project that we did. It was a lot of fun. So yes, we do engage youth. On our website that we have oral histories, we actually have 2 oral histories of the same person. One, we interviewed her when she was 9 years old. She was this wonderful ice skater on the rink, and I was watching her skate around, skating circles around everybody. And she was full of energy. So I asked her mom if I could interview her, and I did. And then years later, we interviewed her when she was 24 years old as a professional ice skater, and she was representing Princess Tiana on Disney on Ice. So we were able to talk about her past experience and where she is now and capture both of those things as they grew. So yeah, we try and do that. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. We do look at contemporary stuff. We want to make sure that we start building things now, especially in the digital age when a lot of people are using smartphones to take pictures. How do we capture that? How do we get that? Clubs and organizations, if they have a Facebook program, a Facebook presence, I really encourage all these organizations to, like, every year. There are third-party resources out there that capture your year's activity in Facebook and put into a printed book. I don't care what you want to say about it. Archives loves tangible materials. And sometimes paper things will last much longer than anything digital. So keep that in mind. So a lot of organizations started doing that, putting their things in a printed format and then donating a copy to our archive.
That's wonderful.
I see another one in there.
Yes, looks like we have another question here. So Lori says, I love the story you told about the scrapbook and the Defender writer. Are there any particular artifacts in your collection that stand out or have notable backstories or winding journeys before they arrived at Shorefront?
Yes, I have a lot of those stories. I'll tell a quick fun one. It's a sad one, fun one, but inspiring one. A family that lived in Evanston for generations. The senior members passed on. The daughter had to come back and clear out the house. Had a lot of stuff in the basement. She had 8 hours to clear out what she wants. She called me in a panic at 8:00 p.m. at night. Went over there with a few boxes. Should have brought a lot more boxes. And she said, take what you need for the archives. And she ushered me down to the basement. And if you imagine maybe a 20-foot by 14-foot space in the basement, lined with boxes around the floor of family history. And all I could do is go through and, like, okay, I have whatever many hours to kind of go through, take a quick assessment and grab what I could. What I got from there was the senior man of the house was first employed as a Pullman porter. And there were a lot of Pullman porter artifacts in one particular box: hand towels, train schedules, and other artifacts related to Pullman porters. So I grabbed a few of those things. He was also employed later on as a chauffeur for the McCormick family. And so we had some artifacts of him being a chauffeur for that organization, for that person. His wife was a leader in the Seamstress Union. So there's a lot of photography and artifacts about the Seamstress Union and her travels throughout the country. Then I found some other family items I pulled, and one of them was the photo album, which I kind of briefly looked through. But then when I was processing everything at Shorefront, and I was looking through it, this is going to test some of your memories now. How many are familiar with Vanessa Williams? First Afro-American Miss America, right? So it turns out that this family's nephew was Vanessa Williams' first husband. And so the photo album was the wedding, and it was taken at Vanessa Williams' home in California. We also had some snapshots in there when she gave birth to her first child, and she was holding her in the hospital. So we have these early pictures of Vanessa Williams holding her baby in the hospital, who now is a singer. Vanessa Williams was a singer, but her oldest daughter is also a singer now. She goes by the name Lions Babe. So you can look that up and see her music. And I think she was produced by Pharrell, who's another well-known producer. So that was a fun thing. Sorry, that was a bit longer than I anticipated. But another incredible story that we're following right now with the family that's been here for generations. I get a call from a family that moved back to Evanston into their parents' home. And they were cleaning out the basement, and they found some scrapbooks from their grandmother under a leaky pipe. So there was some water damage to these scrapbooks. But as they were opening it, they said, you need to come over and look at this. And we found some other documentation that our grandmother was working on. Turned out her grandmother was working on an autobiography about her life, coming to Evanston in 1912, and then going through her work as a domestic worker, then going to school at Northwestern's music school, registering as a registered practicing nurse. But the scrapbook also had contracts because she studied to be an opera singer. And she performed all across the United States. She had her contracts, her union card, ticket stubs, samples of her dress items, newspaper clippings, all of her work as an opera singer. She was a soprano. And one Chicago Tribune News article mentioned that she is second only to Marian Anderson. How cool is that? The other part of her career was that she was involved in the WPA, in the Negro Theater Works in Chicago, where they did a rendition of the Mikado called the Swing Mikado. It was the Mikado in jazz in a remote island off the Pacific. And if you could think about any type of jazzy type music during the time of Duke Ellington, when the dance crave was the Jitterbug or the Lindy Hoppers, imagine that play in that form, and the dancers were doing Lindy Hoppers. She played Katya, which I think was like the co-lead role in the play. And she performed it here in Chicago and in New York. So we had photographs, stage scenes, newspaper articles about that as well. And then the photo album went on to a lot of family life and things she did afterwards, teaching music, vocal with her sister, who's a pianist, and then other engagements in the community as well. So that was an amazing find. And we're looking at ways of publishing her autobiography and then supplementing with part 2 with her work as an opera singer and performer in the Swing Mikado. We did find this, the Swing Mikado was well publicized, photographed, but never recorded. However, there is a special recording of the original Mikado that was done in the 30s in Technicolor that became like the official version of it. And if you go on Amazon, you can buy it now. The additional material in the back has a couple of songs from the Swing Mikado where her voice is on there. So I'm really happy about it. I acquired that. I'm working on a small mini documentary about her life to showcase that. So that's one really amazing things that we're working on right now. All these like stories that are hard to find, obscure, and nobody knew about are the ones that really interest us the most. Because we think that the contemporary things and things that you might know in common history is easier to find. So I spend a lot of time looking for all the obscure things that are hard to find and looking for all the pieces that put that together.
We have any other questions? We could probably take a couple more. I have a question for you, Dino. I thought the presentation was just amazing. I loved the foundation of Shorefront was you in your apartment with just a collection I think that's such a beautiful beginning to an organization that has done such amazing work at this point now, and to collaborate nationally, internationally on a project so near and dear to you, and started at such an amazing point. My question is, you mentioned maybe halfway through the presentation that in Shorefront's kind of modus operandi day to day is that you kind of prefer to be the fly on the wall and kind of do the recordation, allow people to kind of have things play out as normal, and then you're just there documenting everything. Kind of as you started to get more and more into it, and all the influential and really kind of groundbreaking work that Shorefront has done, it seemed to me like Shorefront was kind of beginning to move away from that mold, unintentionally maybe, but because you are such a influential factor in Evanston's history now, with African American history, and collecting it and getting the current community involved, that you have begun to kind of create your own history through Shorefront. So would you say that the mission of Shorefront, now that you've had all this influential work and you've had the opportunity to collaborate nationally, internationally, do you feel like the mission has changed from just merely being a fly on the wall to now pioneering your own work as an institution of merit and as an example to other institutions?
It has, but what we try hard to do is keep running ourselves as like a startup. I think it's very important for our board to understand, and they do understand this, is that we're custodials of this community, and we have to earn that trust every single day that we, every single day. It's just like, we're here, we're the official people, trust our word. We want to be challenged. And I say, I do like an annual report every year. And it's not, let's say, like at the city of Evanston or some municipality or some big institution. I go to the local Foster Senior Club. They've been around since 1940s. They're 400 members strong. They meet every single Wednesday. In fact, if you try and get a meeting with them to present, it may be a 3-month waiting list because everybody wants to go there. But I go there on purpose because this is what I look for when I present what we do. I look for this. But if I start seeing arms crossing, I make note of that and I go to them afterwards and say, what did we do wrong? What are we missing? Did I insult you? Did I, did I misrepresent? And a lot of times, it's like, well, you didn't talk about so-and-so who was the first to do X, Y, Z. I'm like, well, thank you for telling. Now, maybe we have done that already and they have not recognized that we've done that, but we always respond saying, you're right, we might have missed that. So we'll circle back with you on that at a later date. And a lot of times I'll meet up with them again and say, hey, thank you for that information. Here's what we found. That buy-in almost comes in immediately after that. Oh, you paid attention. Thank you. Here's some more things you need to know. So we like being on our toes. We don't want to be the one who's always correct. I do believe that local history needs to be challenged all the time. I think we have to be careful how we sometimes place our current knowledge of history and where things are and how we engage to past events, because it's kind of hard for us to place ourselves back 100 years. What was the climate like? How did people review things and navigate the environment? So we try hard to really kind of center ourselves with that fly on the wall so we can observe more, catch the nuances, so that we can provide something that's transformative, but we still look back to the community to lead. So we don't do things necessarily without the community's permission to do so. The Heritage Site Marker Program, while as great as our idea, we went back to the community to get feedback. We went back to the community, artist Ben Blount, who designed the logo. We went to, created an ad hoc committee of seniors and youth to work out the criteria that we'll use for judging a new site and formulating the questions. And we'll have community members who will review these submissions to make the selection. So we act as facilitators, but the community is more the authoritarian group that we look to. So yes, while we're becoming an institution, we always want to transfer that power back to the community.
Amazing, thank you for that. We probably have time for one more question. You can go ahead and write those in the chat. I'm just going to give some concluding remarks on the program here. Dino, thank you immensely. I think it was an incredible presentation, an incredible run through of Shorefront's ability to conduct amazing work and the work that you are currently conducting and will conduct in the future is truly awe-inspiring. So thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for giving such a great introduction to Shorefront. So I did want to make a couple more remarks before we conclude tonight's program and before we see if there's any other questions. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this program, it was recorded and will be made available to view free of charge on the History Center YouTube channel. So for anyone watching on YouTube, the recording right now, thank you for watching. We greatly appreciate your support. I also did want to mention that virtual programming continues to be made possible by the generous support of Maddie Dugan. So Maddie, thank you again for making Zoom programming possible. We do have a couple programs coming up within the latter half of October and then into November, December. Just want to give a quick introduction to those. On October 27th, we'll be featuring a discussion with architect Greg Koester from North Carolina on the similarities and stylistic personifications and designs of Harry T. Lindeberg and David Adler, two prominent architects from the local Lake Forest and Lake Bluff areas. And then on October 29th, we'll be featuring another discussion with Greg Koester, as well as homeowner Chase Steer on the Dexter Cummings estate in Lake Forest. So those are two architecture-focused programs that have already had a lot of registrations, a lot of excitement building around those, which we're very glad to see. So registration for those can be found on our main website, which is www.lflbhistory.org. Besides programming, we also have a couple upcoming walking tours to be excited about. We have 2 tours of Lake Forest Cemetery taking place on November 4th and November 6th, both at 10 p.m. And registration is available for that on the main website as well. So Dino, yep, Daniel put in the Shorefront. Is that the website, Dino? Is that the main website there?
Sorry, that was my email.
Email.
But I can put the website in again too as well.
Wonderful. Okay, great. So with that, everybody, thank you again for attending tonight's program. Without you, programs like these wouldn't be made possible. So thank you so much for watching and attending. And from all of us here, we wish you a good night, and until next time.